Welcome to Par Review, where small moments become big stories. Lean in the next few minutes might change how you see today. On a Monday that smelled like laser-printed paper and coffee, Jack Carter unlocked the corner door of K-Tech Group and found the day already louder than it needed to be. A cleaner had stepped past the badge line without clearance, a manager was arguing in the hall about whose keys had failed, and a young assistant had mistaken proximity for permission. A different version of this story might chase volume, but Jack had learned a quieter skill: de-escalation that left a record. He asked security to reset the access log, called HR to witness, and reminded the floor that open doors were still private rooms, no speeches, just steps. The incident that followed could have become internet candy in the wrong hands. A staffer burst in with emotions high and accusations higher, pointing at a professional shoulder rub like it was scandal. Jack did not scold or swagger. He asked the staffer to wait in the glass conference room where the camera angle was clean, asked the assistant to step out, and sat with HR so the notes would be neutral. This is how you end a scene without feeding it. Move it to a well-lit table, use people's names, and let them tell the story once. If there is harm, address it. If there is noise, let the minutes grow quiet around it. The building's rumor circuit tried to make Jack the villain or the savior, depending on who needed which that afternoon. He did not audition for either role. Policy, not personality, is what lasts in a company, and he preferred structures that reduce the room for improvisational chaos. He also preferred that young professionals learn the difference between closeness and access, between attention and permission. That evening at the Carter house on Sycamore, the front parlor was gentler than the office, but not entirely simpler. The family had sponsored Emily Lou through school for years. Now she stood in the doorway, composed, proud, wearing clothes that had seen more wash cycles than new seasons, and offered to help around the house as a gesture of gratitude. Jack's mother liked the idea immediately. She missed the sound of a second voice in the daytime. Jack liked the students' confidence, but not the unequal terms of gratitude as labor. He suggested a boundary instead. Tuition and housing assistance would remain separate from domestic work. Gratitude could be shown by studying hard, not by folding Carter towels. Emily stiffened at the word boundary, the way some people do when a rule brushes against a fragile hope. Jack noticed the phone in her hand. A high-end model, she said, was borrowed, and the look in her eyes that meant she was bracing for judgment. He offered none. He talked about how sponsorships are for school, how appearances can mislead, and how the house had rules that kept strangers from turning into family too fast. He proposed a review of paperwork, a stipend schedule, and a simple agreement. Any stay at the house would be brief and specific, with dates and duties spelled out. Jack's mother nodded. Emily held his gaze, thoughtful and a little annoyed, which can be the face integrity wears before it speaks. The adults signed their names, the student signed hers, and a potential story about scandal simply became a record about support with guardrails. He chose calm over spectacle and let policy, law, and plain kindness do the heavy lifting. He kept the focus on safety and dignity rather than drama or revenge. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. The scholarship audit began the way good audits do, in daylight with clear folders and with no raised voices. Jack asked the foundation office to send the last year of receipts and bursa notes. A volunteer coordinator confirmed that Emily's classes were real and her attendance steady. The phone that looked expensive turned out to have been a loaner from a cousin for a few weeks while her old model failed. The cousin's text confirmed it. Uneasy assumptions softened, rules still mattered. So did feelings. At the same time, Emily's ambition was plain. She had been accepted into a performing arts program and wanted to keep her scholarship while trying for parts. Jack explained the hard math of entertainment, the grind, the side jobs, the gatekeepers, who sometimes confuse charisma for character, and pointed her toward unions, workshops, and mentors who protected their own. He said what many young strivers never hear. Beware the shortcuts that pretend to be opportunities. If the budget did not fit, the scholarship could pivot to a public college with a stronger safety net. The aim was not to shrink her dream, but to choose a runway she could actually land on. The house rules adjusted accordingly. No overnight stays without prior approval and a defined purpose. No leveraging Carter connections for auditions without the foundation's okay, because favoritism feels good until it ruins trust. Emily bristled at the constraints. Bristling is human. She argued for freedom the way people do when they have not yet named the difference between freedom and freeloading. Jack listened, repeated the terms, and invited her to put her energy into coursework and a part-time job that would let her meet rent without debt. He was not trying to be her father. He was trying to leave fewer ways for the story to go wrong. Outside the house, K-Tech had its own party to manage, a cross-industry reception at the Meridian where families in Jack's orbit traded alliances like chess moves. Jack believed in partnerships built on mutual benefit rather than mythology. He did not like the phrase power couple, but he respected the way two firms could carry a risk together that neither would carry alone. The guest list read like a directory of boardrooms and legacy foundations. Jack kept his tie simple, his remarks shorter than expected, and his exits clean. He avoided cameras that wanted to turn business into theatre. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He remembered that prevention. The week of the engagement announcement arrived with extra cameras, extra flowers, and a heaviness in Jack's shoulders he did not examine too closely. The arrangement with Nina Bai had been negotiated in the clear. Two families with aligned interests, two careers that could benefit from shared projects. No pretense that wildfire romance was part of the bargain. Jack could name the upside without pretending it was poetry. He could also name the cost of turning private life into a corporate instrument. The disruption when it came was messy but familiar. A former boyfriend who mistook interruption for courage, a speech about authentic love that belonged in another room, a reluctance among bystanders to be the first to act. Jack did not perform chivalry. He performed coordination. He signaled security to close the aisle without force, signaled the MC to hold the mic, and signaled the planner to escort guests to the lounge. He met Nina at center and asked a question that mattered more than appearances. "Do you want to leave together or separately?" She said separately. He nodded, walked her to her family, and announced, calmly, that the event would end early with gratitude to all who came. The headlines would say, drama. The footage would show exits. At home, Jack's mother tried to console him with the old arithmetic of alliance. Doors close, other doors open. But he did not feel wounded so much as relieved. It is a strange relief, the kind that comes when a narrative you did not love stops asking you to play its lead. He sent Nina a short message wishing her clear days ahead and received one in return that carried both apology and presence. Adults sometimes sound like that when they are trying again to be adults. Emily watched the coverage from the kitchen table and tried to hide her interest. She also tried to convert sympathy into permission, for looser rules, for house exceptions, for the feeling that the family owed her a soft place to land because the world is hard. Jack declined without sermon. He paid the next tuition tranche, forwarded a list of studio contacts who worked above board, and reminded her that help is a bridge, not a permanent apartment. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. With the public part of the engagement behind him, Jack returned to what he actually loved, building teams that worked and building days that did not hurt anybody on purpose. When a tabloid invited him to answer questions about Nina and the interloper, he declined. The right to privacy is not a refusal of truth. It is a refusal to turn truth into buffet food. Counsel drafted a simple line for inquiries, and the line did what lines do when you draw them early, kept people from wandering into rooms where they were not invited. Emily's path bent and straightened in quick alternation. A few auditions went well, a few went nowhere. One producer tried to turn a callback into a barter. She refused. She came home angry and sad in equal measure, and Jack did what he could. Scheduled time with a mentor who had navigated the same maze, recommended a scene study teacher who did not confuse pain with craft, and showed Emily how to budget with a spreadsheet that did not lie. None of this felt heroic. It felt like duty. Some stories survive because somebody keeps paying the boring bills. The family ally who had long hovered at the edge of Jack's timelines, Jenna Jiang, stepped into the center with a proposal he could respect, a project placing K-Tech's logistics platform into community food programs at cost for 1 year with renewal based on impact. Jenna could be intense, but intensity applied to good math is a civic virtue. Jack said yes. They shook hands on a plan that might never trend, but would make dinners happen in households where dinners had become math problems. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. The months after the broken engagement did not feel like aftermath so much as new ground. K-Tech's quarter was solid. Jenna's food program pilot delivered numbers you could hold in your hand. Emily adjusted her plan, fewer auditions, more classes, a part-time job that dignified her day. And her voice found a steadier register. She apologized once for testing boundaries as if apologies needed theater. Jack told her they did not. He asked only that she keep matching help with effort. And she did. News drifted in about the other players in the earlier drama. Jack chose not to repeat it on air. Private sorrows did not belong to his microphone. What he could say, and did say when people asked him about moving on, is that the secret to resilience is not hardness, but habit. Read before you sign, sleep before you decide, and write down what hurts, so you do not hand it to the next person you meet. At a small ceremony with no press, Jack and Jenna formalized a partnership that was neither romance nor theater, a joint initiative to train apprentices from neighborhood's most tech firms forgot. They launched the first cohort in a repurposed warehouse with windows that actually opened. Jack's mother stood in the back and cried the tidy, private kind of tears that come from relief. Emily moved to a studio apartment with a friend from class and paid rent on time because a spreadsheet told her to. She and Jack remained in each other's calendars without mistaking proximity for obligation. When she booked a small part in a regional production, she brought a box of cheap candy to the Carter porch and grinned like she had traded a mountain for a stairwell and found out the view could still be good. Jack clapped the way he did everything, twice the way his father had taught him, and then asked whether she had backup shoes for the role. Practical love sounds like that. On an evening that looked like any other, Jack sat at his desk and wrote 4 lines on a card he kept near the monitor. Wall, truth, lock, boundary, light, discipline, pace, mercy. He did not publish them, he practiced them. The city outside kept being a city, the internet kept wanting a scene, and the people in Jack's life kept choosing more often than not to hand each other something kinder than their worst day. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He narrated events in clear, non-graphic language so listeners could think instead of flinch. He remembered that prevention is better than. The city moved like ordinary weather in the background of their decisions. Small routines did most of the lifting, a calendar kept, a door locked, a promise written. Witnesses were asked, reports were filed, and then the room remembered how to breathe. When feelings swelled, he returned to simple facts and the next useful step. Kindness showed up as proportion, not spectacle, and it traveled well. Where the story could have chased rumor, it chose clarity and moved on. He let sleep, food, and steady work hold the floor while drama stepped outside. Adults arrived, names were taken, and the day learned to end on time. They practiced repair without turning it into a performance for strangers. He kept the narration plain so listeners could follow the choices that mattered. The city moved like ordinary weather in the background of their decisions. Small routines did most of the lifting, a calendar kept, a door locked, a promise written. Witnesses were asked, reports were filed, and then the room remembered how to breathe. When feelings swelled, he returned to simple facts and the next useful step. Kindness showed up as proportion, not spectacle, and it traveled well. Where the story could have chased rumor, it chose clarity and moved on. He let sleep, food, and steady work hold the floor while drama stepped outside. Adults arrived, names were taken, and the day learned to end on time. They practiced repair without turning it into a performance for strangers. He kept the narration plain so listeners could follow the choices that mattered. The city moved like ordinary weather in the background of their decisions. Small routines did most of the lifting, a calendar kept, a door locked, a promise written. Witnesses were asked, reports were filed, and then the room remembered how to breathe. When feelings swelled, he returned to simple facts and the next useful step. Kindness showed up as proportion, not spectacle, and it traveled well. Where the story could have chased rumor, it chose clarity and moved on. He let sleep, food, and steady work hold the floor while drama stepped outside. Adults arrived, names were taken, and the day learned to end on time. They practiced repair without turning it into a performance for strangers. He kept the narration plain so listeners could follow the choices that mattered. The city moved like ordinary weather in the background of their decisions. Small routines did most of the lifting, a calendar kept, a door locked, a promise written. Witnesses were asked, reports were filed, and then the room remembered how to breathe. When feelings swelled, he returned to simple facts and the next useful step. Kindness showed up as proportion, not spectacle, and it travelled well. Where the story could have chased rumour, it chose clarity and moved on. He let sleep, food, and steady work hold the floor, while drama stepped outside. Adults arrived, names were taken, and the day learned to end on time. They practiced repair without turning it into a performance for strangers. He kept the narration plain so listeners could follow the choices that mattered. The city moved like ordinary weather in the background of their decisions. Small routines did most of the lifting: a calendar kept, a door locked, a promise written. Witnesses were asked, reports were filed, and then the room remembered how to breathe. When feelings swelled, he returned to simple facts and the next useful step. Kindness showed up as proportion, not spectacle, and it travelled well. He kept the narration plain so listeners could follow the choices that mattered. Your turn? Share your take, add a twist, or tell me what to cover next in the comments. If this story hit the mark, tap, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter with PA Review. Wishing you and your family a day full of joy and happiness with your loved ones. Goodbye and see you again.